Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and I welcome all of you to what is basically a fairly picturesque February morning in Great Britain. Basically, grey sky, some snow. It's basically been snowing for the best part of a month now, just very intermittently at the very least, which is okay, I suppose, but this has actually kind of like been the longest period I can remember where there's been like on and off snow. And it's curious, again, you look through the deep recesses of your memory and you find out just when these things happen. It's very, very important that we take a special interest in things like this. Maybe it's the weather, because there are certain parts of our lives where we learn things instinctively through past experiences. This is actually something that my brother taught me a few days ago, because for those who don't know, my brother studies biochemistry at the University of Dundee in Scotland, only until COVID-19 got worse and my brother's being condemned to homeschooling and he does his lectures online, which realistically means he could have studied at Oxford or Cambridge for all the difference that it makes in the long run. However, what I wanted to emphasize is something he taught me about how memories are stored, or how can memories be resurfaced in our minds. You see, ladies and gentlemen, there's a lobe on the back of our brains called the hippocampus, which is basically the part of our brain in which adult neurogenesis occurs. Now, there's a chemical reaction that happens in the hippocampus called I believe it's called the neurogeno-hypocambriatrical system, in which chemicals are trichiaptral system. Basically, cells inside our brains are divided into threes and then are sent through a journey through our frontal through lobes, somewhere like near the center of the brain. Not like I know there's a part of the brain which reacts to fear through the central nervous system. It's sort of like bioptic nerves, because there's two it has to go through in the center of our heads, and then through a sort of like a neurostorage sort of center. I can't quite remember what the term is. That's sort of located just behind the bridge of the nose, in which memories are then sort of sort of like generated. Now, the reason why it's called adult neurogenesis is because these are memories that have resurfaced primarily as an adult, because for, let's say, I'll give you an example of something that I can relate to, is that when I was very young, possibly 3 or 4 years old, one of the things that I always sort of like resonated whenever it was snowing and all that was the smell of like smelting oil. I'm not entirely sure if you can technically smelt oil, but I remember there was this awful smell of oil in the air. And I don't quite know how I can explain how that came to be, but that's something that I've always kind of like reminisced whenever the weather is quite like it is outside, is the smell of burning oil. And often at times I can actually remember numerous occasions where I'd probably be walking home when it's particularly very cold, and then there would be a smell of burning oil. Whether or not it was actually there is a good point, but there were definitely occasions where it were, and I remembered when I was very young, and this must have been nearly 20 years ago, and I could remember where I smelt it, and that's one of the things that it's a fascinating thing, isn't it? Because it can even occur when you're not actually smelling the oil. Because I remember when I was 11 years old. My mother was playing a bunch of home movies, and one of them was back in about 2002, where it was basically me in the back garden, and I got this whiff inside my nose of burning oil, because I remember back at that time that's when that smell really did first occur to me, and that was it's a fascinating thing how things like these can happen, because aside from this very not particularly very special incident of reminiscing snow or wintry weather with burning oil, there are many occasions in our lives where there is something that causes us to reminisce, whether it's of our own accord or not. And speaking of reminiscing, ladies and gentlemen, that was one of the biggest things that was on my mind, certainly, when I was doing the readings this morning. Whether or not the life I have lived already is the only life I will ever know. Because, in many ways, I'm quite right in this suggestion, because how can I put myself into... I'm not talking in the sense of I can't, empathize with other people, but I can't physically, or things that cannot be simply summarized by being empathetic. To sort of like really understand what a person might be going through, I would have to physically and literally be somebody else, which we all know is impossible to do. However, one of the readings that was this morning, and it was actually both of them that gave me quite a lot to think about. Not so much of what has come before, but what might be coming in the future. Because it's all well and good to reminisce and to think about goodness knows what. It could be burning oil, it could be smelting a chocolate or anything like that. But there are certain things that could almost tell us our future and our destiny. And without further ado, I would actually like to give the first reading today. It was actually from the book of Job. It's chapter 7, verses 1 to 4, and from 6 till 7. Job began to speak. Is not man's life on earth nothing more than pressed service? Has time no better than hired drudgery? Like the slave sighing for the shade, or the workman with no thought but his wages. Months of delusion have assigned to me, nothing for my own but nights of grief. Lying in bed I wonder, when will it be day? Risen I think, how slowly evening comes. Relentlessly I fret till twilight falls. Swifter than a weaver's shuttle, my days have passed and vanished, leaving no hope behind. Remember that my life is but a breath, and that my eyes will never again see joy. The word of the Lord, thanks be to God. Now, Job was a man who was considerably very fortunate in life. He was born to a very wealthy family. He had a caring and a faithful wife. He had a very profitable farm. And then days came and his family abandoned him. His crops failed. His wife had deserted him. It seemed everything Job was touching was turning into dust all around him. His destiny seemed to be from being on the highest position he could think of to falling down into pits of deep despair. But surely, because Job was a man who placed his faith in God and who was born on earth about 700 or so years before Jesus Christ. So what I want to ask right now, ladies and gentlemen, is it true in my case, or is it true in your case? Do you think your best years have passed? That's a very interesting thing, especially, I think it's sort of like, I think from how I see it is that if I was quite a lot older, if I was, let's say, 56, then I would say possibly my best years were behind me, but that doesn't mean to say my life was now coming to an end. As long as I was still alive, I would like to imagine that there were things to come, including death, for the lack of a better term I could use at this moment. But putting in the perspective of somebody who is 23, I'm not entirely sure I feel comfortable with using the term young anymore, because I'm not entirely sure if I really am young anymore. And you might say that's the first sign of wondering whether or not your best days have gone, by realizing that your youth, which is usually associated with things like childhood, teenage years, and being in your early 20s, but very soon, in around about a year from now, I won't be in my early 20s anymore. I'll be into my mid-20s. I'll be 24 in 51 weeks from today. So, what do I do? What do I do, ladies and gentlemen? That's my question I want to ask to you, is what do I do if I feel as if like there is nothing better to look forward to? but I think I will be able to do my best to answer it, ladies and gentlemen. You see, if in my perspective, and I've said this to myself a few times before, is that if I was truly concerned about death, then I wouldn't even think about trying to continue anyway. Because if I'm in this sort of mindset where thinking that nothing better in my life was going to come, even though I could go on till my 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, possibly 80s for all I knew. That could be very nearly 60 years left of my life, but surely there must be good things to come in 60 years. I can't just live my life knowing that nothing good could ever come out of anything I could ever try. That's simply unheard of. Unless I was going to be kidnapped and tortured for 60 years before being released, only to die like some neglected animal, then that might be the case, but it isn't, because it's very unlikely that thing will happen. Not to say that it won't, but it's not it wouldn't go unnoticed is what I think I'm trying to say. Meanwhile, there is something that I have neglected on, especially in the last couple of months of my life where I've been working my first real full-time job. Months of delusion I have assigned to me. Delusions of grandeur, delusions that I could make any change with all these videos I'm making. Perhaps it is a delusion of grandeur, but then again, would it only be a delusion if when it's brought up to the light and I have to face reality, will it show that I have been delusional? That's one of the best things I could possibly say in regards to me calling myself delusional. If I succeed, then I am not delusional. If I don't succeed, I'm not delusional because I put a lot of work and time into and effort into what I do. And somebody who has high hopes, high aspirations, and a high and strong work ethic is not delusional, regardless of what his results may be. My results, ladies and gentlemen, from this expedition will be, like I've said a few times before, is that I like to imagine my videos, everything I make, is not so much a forest, but a vineyard. A vineyard of beautiful grapes that will grow and subsequently become sweet, fine wine. However, the harvest is not here yet. I am planting the seeds as we speak, and only when the light shines upon them will we find out if they grow or not, or whether or not they will be just left to rot like some forgotten field in some part of Italy, I suspect. Now, with that being said, I'm gonna, like I said last week with the reading from Jonah, I'm definitely gonna keep a hold of this, and it will give me certainly a lot to think about. In particular, what the second reading has also said has also given me a lot to think about. A lot to think about, not so much whether or not the future will tell whether or not my successes are going to be noteworthy or not, but what I'm doing right now in the present, whether or not my work is futile from the very start. So I'm going to give you guys the sample right now. It's from this first letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians, and it's from chapter 9, 16 to 19, and 22 to 23. I do not boast of preaching the gospel, since it is a duty which has been laid onto me. I should be punished if I did not preach it. If I had chosen this work myself, I might have been paid for it. But as I have not, it is a responsibility which has been put into my hands. Do you know what my reward is? It is this: in my preaching, to be able to offer the good news free, and not insist on the rights which the gospel gives me. So there, I am not a slave of any man. I have made myself the slave of everyone, so as to win as many as I could. For the weak, I have made myself weak. I have made myself all things to all men, in order to save some at any cost. And I still do this, for the sake of the gospel, to have a share in its blessings. the word of the Lord, thanks be to God. So this addresses the entire attempt of making the hundreds of music reaction videos in the first place. I know fine well that the profits are indeed very small. I do know, however, that not everybody is going to share the same opinions I do. I know fine well that in the past, not all of my works have been, well, all of my videos, I should say, have received substantial amount of attention compared to, no doubt, dozens of other YouTubers out there. I know probably better than everyone else that no matter the boldness of what I have attempted has not always met with grand results. I am perfectly aware that my previous successes have almost always ended in failure. However, that is not necessary to be as successful through that sense is not particularly what it is all about. If for anything, then the music I listen to is almost a gateway into nirvana for me. It is a way of learning through people, through the medium of music, how life can be presented to any capacity, to any length, to any instrument or calling whatsoever. You really think that... I would argue that, for a very good example, is that if you do not like heavy metal music, and I put on for you, and I showed you a sample of Disposable Heroes, maybe that will possibly change your mind. It may do or may not, but that was the first ever video I made where I cried. And I don't particularly like to, cry that often when I'm doing these videos, but Disposable Heroes, and even thinking about it now, has got me almost misty-eyed because of not so much the implications, but what actually happens in war. Meanwhile, ladies and gentlemen, that's the sort of thing that makes you more precious and more appreciative of the life we have now, because others have died so that we may live in freedom. And they could and boys no more than 22 or 24 years old were writing stuff like that. I should be taking my place among them to write, to change somebody else's life as well. Music, for the last few years, has changed my life in ways that I would have to write collections of novels together just to convey even slightly what it means to me. And I could even use my adult neurogenesis right now, because it was in this position right now, the way we're watching right now, is where I made my very first reaction video to Welcome Home Sanitarium. This layout, everything you see here was not quite here several years ago, but this is basically restarting from the very beginning. Many things have changed, but I am still here, and I am still working. I need to keep working. That is what I've learned through this whole experience, is that I've got a lot to learn, and I've got to keep working at learning. That's what I've got to do, ladies and gentlemen. And I would highly encourage many others out there to take this message as well, to learn about what you need to do next, ladies and gentlemen. Whether you're young or old, there's plenty of things still to learn in this world. And I'll conclude this video by saying a phrase that has almost become a motto for this channel now. There is work to be done, ladies and gentlemen. Always more work. And with that being said, I hope all of you have enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Take care, ladies and gentlemen, and bye-bye for now. Oh, and one more thing just before we go. My drawing actually made the front of the newsletter. That was very, very nice of them to do, and I made sure to give my thanks to the father at Mass today. Take care, ladies and gentlemen, and bye-bye for now.